The short magazine Lee Enfield, right now on Pirate Firearms and Reloading. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going over one of my favorite surplus rifles, and this is the short magazine Lee Enfield. Multiple different names over the years. More specifically, this is a rifle #1 MkIII Star. I will get into the variants in that a little bit later on the video, but this was one of the most common service rifles for the Commonwealth throughout parts of World War I and World War II and even beyond. Fantastic rifle. There's a lot of variants, so I'll kind of explain where this one fits in throughout the video. But it's chambered in the .303 British cartridge. These rifles were designed for the more modern ammunition that was propelled by cordite. So this is your case here. This is a dummy round. These are just surplus stuff left over. You'll note the nickel-plated projectile. That was somewhat common with the higher velocity ammunitions. So originally this cartridge actually started as black powder, and they put actual capsules of black powder in, and then they actually formed the case around those black powder pellets, not like traditional loose black powder that most of us would use today. Later on, they did almost the same thing with sticks of cordite, so not actually smokeless powder, cordite. The biggest problem with these is the primers. They're a Burden style primer, and the surplus stuff like this, I think this is, I'm not sure where this ammo came from. So this is ammunition made in 1969, well, originally before it got fired, of course. I basically just body sized it and then put a projectile in it, so I've got some dummy rounds. So yeah, they went through multiple different iterations of ammunition. The black powder variant had a lead projectile, and that was about 200 grains. Then they went to the Spitzer like you see now, and they're around the 174 grain mark. They played with velocities and bits and pieces. The MkIII ammunition, which this rifle is set up to shoot, was typically around 24-40 feet per second with that 174 grain Spitzer. So surprisingly, a remarkably accurate round, and you can get some of these rifles that won't shoot no matter what you do, and you get others like my one here which seems to shoot phenomenally well. This does actually have a dark bore. It's not really pitted, it's just dark, and unfortunately the gentleman I bought this off, he loaned it to somebody else to hunt with. They used surplus ammunition and failed to clean the barrel in time. A lot of this corrosive stuff, you end up actually doing what's called boiling the barrel. As you can imagine, you pour boiling water down the barrel. This removes not only the nickel that is deposited from the projectiles in this case, but it neutralizes all the corrosive properties. The modern stuff we shoot today obviously is now a boxer primer, no more corrosive stuff. Some people will still reload this if they can find Burden primers, but for me, it's going to be dummy rounds. I'd rather be dealing with modern smokeless powder. And in fact, the reload I use for it, I use Hornady's 174 grain 303 projectile. Ironically, that is 311 or 312, depending. You can get a couple of variants of that ammunition because the barrels have quite a big tolerance in them. And that comes to the variation of it was made during the war, and their tolerances were pretty loose in order to produce rifles. Really, they only expected about 4 MOA out of these rifles ever. If you get one that shoots better than that, you're doing very, very well. With iron sights shooting from the sling, I can get this down to about 2 MOA at 100 meters. More than happy with that. This is the first time that the British or the Commonwealth issued one rifle right across all of the branches. So previously you'd have like a cavalry carbine, you'd have your long rifle, you may even have another variant for, say, officers and rear echelon type troops. This is the first time that everybody basically got issued the same rifle. And they finally agreed that ridiculous barrels, in terms of their length anyway, were not really needed. So these rifles out of the box, basically, they're weighing just under 10 pounds. When you start, changing things on these to make them sort of competitive in the service rifle game, you will end up increasing weight. It's just the way it goes. You have a 10-round detachable magazine. You'll note the loop here on the bottom. Hopefully that's on the camera. Yes, it is. Originally, these magazines in the earlier variants would be chained to that loop because they never intended you to replace the magazine when you needed to reload. There is a release here, and the magazine was generally only ever released for cleaning. So they were intended to be loaded from stripper clips. There's, once again, multiple variants of these. They're nothing particularly special. The most important thing, if you ever put ammunition in a stripper clip to use it this way, is you have to do up, down, up, down, up, down. Because this is a rimmed case, if you don't put them in the clip like that and you try to load them, you will get rim lock, whereas one rim will lock over the edge of the other and it will jam the entire thing up. You have to remove the magazine and clear it. Right royal pain. So as they would come, you would get a cotton bandolier with a little cotton bit tied through to tear away, and you could pull these out. They would either go onto your webbing belt, or a lot of troops just took them straight from the bandolier and put them in their rifle. So when you got resupplied, you'd get one of these cotton bandoliers. What makes this rifle particularly unique is at the time it was credited as being the world's fastest bolt-action rifle. There's multiple diaries of Axis and German soldiers who have said that they thought they were under either semi-automatic or automatic gunfire. You can imagine you get an entire rifle company with these things going at it, 10 rounds in the magazine. They can lay down a lot of firepower. And part of what makes this rifle so quick to shoot and load is the bolt setup. So this is a cock-on closing bolt. So you'll note here, if you pay attention to the cocking piece, as I push the bolt forward, the cocking piece actually stays in place. And that's because it is not cocked until you go to close the rifle. If you haven't fired and you open it, it tends to want to spring backwards. But for what it is a very, very slick bolt. You have a very large guide rail here on the top, and you have a bolt guide here with the bolt head. To make these serviceable for the armourers, they would remove the bolt by clipping that tab up. There's a little springed detent here on the running rail, if you like. And if you didn't have a rear sight like mine, you would simply remove the bolt at this point. This bolt face actually unscrews, and there was multiple different sizes, so an armourer could very rapidly correct a headspace problem. And that's something we do see as these rifles have made it into the general public's hands, as some of them have terrible, terrible headspace. So if you do pick one of these up, it is worth getting that checked out. It's not so bad if you're shooting factory ammo or surplus ammo. If you ever want to reload your brass, you need to make sure that headspace is correct. That's the same with the chambers. A lot of the chambers were very, very sloppy. Once again, wartime production, you don't want to have something that's going to be finicky. Now, I have changed this rifle around a little bit. As you can see, I have a aperture rear sight with micrometer adjustable clicks. I have a slightly off screen. I have a tunnel front sight assembly. That's actually brass, which is quite unique. That one is specifically designed for a number 4 rifle. However, it will fit a number 1 rifle if you reverse the front sight post. So the post itself has a pin detent and it has a slight angle on it. On the number 4s, that angle is facing the other way. So you have to remove it, swap it around, that will fit on. So that's something a little specific to me. Obviously the aperture rear sight, and then I also have the armourer's wooden cheek piece that would have been fitted at the time. So these were fitted rather crudely, to be fair. I spent a bit of time getting the colour match with the stock and making it look period correct, including adding a few chips and dings, just like the rest of the rifle has. The armourers would fit these for the sniper variants, which would have a scope on top, a very basic scope, but a scope nonetheless. Those rifles also usually had a heavy barrel in them, whereas the standard rifle like this does not. So that's been fitted. I also have a leather cuff on the rear. The brass butt pad, if you intend on shooting these prone, is rather aggressive in the shoulder and in the collarbone. So just a little bit of leather over the end takes that bite away from the stock. Given the weight of the rifle, these are remarkably comfortable to shoot. I certainly wouldn't put, somebody of a smaller stature behind this as some of their first centerfire shooting, but for somebody who is well versed in shooting, there's absolutely no problems with this. Now, just to speak on the leather for a second. So both this leather sling and the leather bayonet frog here are reproduction variants. The leather would have normally been exclusive to cavalry, and infantry soldiers were issued a webbing sling and a webbing bayonet frog. I have chosen to go with the leather purely because I find the leather sling is better for sling-supported shooting. I do have the original surplus sling that came with this rifle. I don't have, sadly, the original webbing bayonet frog. This bayonet is the correct one for the rifle. Serial numbers do match. And you'll note this is more of a short sword. So this is the 1903 pattern bayonet. Nothing particularly special in terms of bayonets. You have a lug lock in the back, a loop in the front, on the hand guard, of course, and a nice big blood groove. These were never ever sharpened because they were a stabby device rather than a slashing device. You'll see a lot of old school pig hunters in New Zealand. They will actually modify these, shorten them down because the steel is so good in these, and turn them into a pig sticking knife. I'm going to leave mine the way I got it. And it's interesting, you will find that these bayonets will fetch a small fortune in good condition. Having one that matches the rifle with serial numbers is even more important if you really want to be a collector. This is definitely not a safe point. I do take it out. I do shoot it on a regular basis. You actually have a rounded lug. You have a round lug down here around the bottom. This is very similar to what you would possibly see on, say, a trench shotgun from World War I. Similar setup here. Your lug back here and a mount assembly here. You'll also notice there's kind of a lug down here. Some of the earlier rifles even had a sling swivel there. This is a star variant which does not have some of these extra features. So the bayonet would be mounted like that. Now, given that this rifle already has an overall length of about 50 inches, adding a small sword to the front allows you to stay further away from the person you don't like. So that's a very simple overview of the bayonet. Now I will bring you forward again to see the front sight. So if you're a regular infantry soldier, you would get a blade style front sight. Now the rear sight, particularly on this variant, the MkIII Star, does not have any windage adjustment in the rear sight. So you would purely be holding for windage. What was done by the armourers, this is what they call a front sight cramp, C-R-A-M-P. And what it would do, you would take this nose cap assembly off here and you would wind these. Now, so you'd tighten both of these up onto the front sight blade, and then you would wind one back a quarter turn and one in a quarter turn, and that would move approximately 1 MOA. So that was set up for the shooters based on the target they shot when they were issued their rifle. The other way that it was adjusted in terms of elevation for the individual shooter was there was different height front sight blades. So your entire tuning to the shooter would be done at the front sight, and then in theory that would put the ladder on the rear sight. So as you can see here, this rear sight is graduated, and Just an important note, if you are picking up one of these rifles, if you lift up this rear sight, you'll notice here on the barrel it's stamped HV. That is for high velocity ammunition. And if you look closely, this is a rather polished surface, and that's because that has been reprofiled for the MkIII ammunition. So you have two ways of adjusting the sight. You have a push button on this side for course adjustment. Ironically, this sight does go out to 2,000 meters. The reason for that is more of a volley fire type setup. If you need to make incremental adjustments, you have a worm here, which can be turned to make more accurate, say 25 meter adjustments. A simple screw in here removes that. You may notice, because I have the aperture sights on the rear, that this sight piece is actually upside down and my V-notch is in the lower side. That's just so I don't have to remove this sight. I keep the aesthetic while allowing the rear sight to still be used. So you're going to notice in the top of the action here, you have what they refer to as the charging bridge. And so this is specifically designed with your bolt in the rearward position to hold the stripper clip or loading clip in place. You'll also notice there is a notch out on this side of the action that is allowing you to push your thumb across. So what would happen, needed to reload, grab that there, you push down like that. Now, if you're trying to be nice to your clips, you'd then remove it, or if you wanted to put a further 10 in, obviously you have to remove it. The neat thing about this, if you give it a good nudge forward, I did it with the back of my hand because I'm at an awkward angle, the clip itself will remove itself from the rifle. So designed to be very fast to shoot and very fast to reload. All right, so that provided the soldier a very, very rapid way of reloading the rifle. That's probably the basics. I'll turn around and I'll show you the aperture sight I have installed. Keeping with the Australian built rifle, and myself being a Kiwi, we got all our rifles out of Lithgow in Australia. It only seems fit that I have an Australian made aperture sight. So this is referred to as an Australian Premier, hence the little silhouette of Australia and Premier in the centre. So just like you may see some of the Parker Hale setups for these rifles, this is in a very similar vein. You have a vernier scale. You actually have a range scale on this side. These would typically be zeroed at 200 meters, and then your scale is accurate. You also have a micrometer scale on the other side if you're working more in MOA. Same with the windage setup on the back here, and I have swapped out for a Parker Hale aperture eyepiece, which has a variable hole diameter. Depending on how bright or how dark the shooting conditions are, I can make an adjustment for that. The other thing to note on this rifle is the safety setup. So I'll just close the bolt. The safety is here. It is this toggle. It goes all the way into that rearward position, and it also locks the bolt. The other thing that people may not be aware of, you can actually use that to hold the bolt in the rearward position by applying it now, and it will also lock the bolt. If you had a round that failed to fire, you could then grab the cocking piece and pull it into that rearward position and fire again. Two-stage trigger. It's a remarkably crisp trigger for what it is. It sits around about 5.5 pounds. It is probably on the heavy side for most people, but it's nice to actually have something with a heavy trigger pull once in a while. Remind yourself how to actually shoot and how to manipulate a trigger correctly. So you'll see you have a first stage here, which is reasonably heavy. That's probably about 2.5 pounds. And so it's probably a 2.5 and 2.5 added together. And then your final break, which is nice and crisp. That's probably one of the nicest features of the rifle. Now, I am going to go portable here, and we're going to talk about some of the markings, because depending on where your rifle was made, there is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different markings that you may find on the rifle. I'm just going over the Lithgow and the Australian issued and built rifles. This also copies over for New Zealand service rifles as well. If you have a BSA or a Long Branch or any of the others, the number 4s were actually even made by Savage in the United States. And you'll see US government property stamped on the side. They were part of the Lend-Lease type system. So what do all these numbers mean? So this is a rifle number 1 Mark III star. So it's a Mark III, but the star indicates like a wartime production, and a few features were removed. So on the Mark IIIs, there was a set of volley sights here on the side, a very coarse adjustment for a whole rifle company to basically lob rounds generally in a direction. It was never intended to be accurate, although it did seem to work relatively well. That was deleted, and it was basically relied upon that rear sight was used at that point. You may notice that there's a sort of large chunk of wood missing out of this particular area here, and that in an exposed bit of metal. The Mark IIIs by themselves had a magazine cutoff. So there was a bar that slid across and essentially blocked the magazine well. There was multiple purposes for this. Drill and parade was one of them, but also if you had like a rifle mounted grenade or something and you needed to drop a blank in and you didn't want to accidentally chamber a live round, you could close that cutoff, remove the live round, drop the blank round in, close the rifle, fire your rifle grenade, open that cutoff out again, and be back in action. So all these little features that ultimately in the end were deemed probably not necessary, they were removed on the star variant. So this is obviously in its original fully wooded configuration. A lot of them you'll see are sporterized, where the stocks ended, just in front of the sights here, and they cut all the rest of the wood off. They do have a really, really pencil thin barrel, and without the support of the wooden stock, your accuracy after about 2 or 3 rounds is gone. There's even stories at places like Gallipoli and the D-Day invasion that troops would pick up a second rifle off a poor comrade who didn't need it anymore, and they would have 2. When one got hot and all the oils and they use like a linseed oil, would start basically leaving the stock. You'd see it, and if you get these hot enough, you'll still see it to this day because they had so much put into the wood. They would put that rifle down, let it cool, pick up the other rifle, and continue with the firefight. Same with the magazines. It was quite common to see troops pick up magazines in the field and have them preloaded as well. So let's go over some of the markings. Some of this may be boring to you. Some of it you may be seriously interested. I am not a big expert on this. I know enough probably to be dangerous. So one of the most distinct markings you're going to see on my particular rifle is this one here, FTR, which is Factory Thorough Repair. So interestingly enough, mine doesn't actually have a date. Most of the examples of these will have a date in which they were repaired. And it was usually only 2 numbers just for the end of the year. A lot of these were sort of done in the 50s. And that could be anything from a new barrel. There was a whole lot of things going on. So that's one of the interesting ones. The ammunition one I showed you before would quite often appear on the buttstock, but also under the front sight. Right, to show you a bit more, we'll take this top piece of wood off here, which is on spring-loaded clips. This will give us a bit more information about the barrel itself. On here, if I can get my camera to focus, and even I struggle to see it with the naked eye, but down here is stamped HV for high velocity. Some other stamps you're going to see an A with a star and a number below it, which I cannot read the number. It looks to be a 2 maybe. So that is later Lithgow production. So that's out of the Lithgow Small Arms factory. and that's between 1913 and 1956. Now, the serial number itself will tell me the production. In their infinite wisdom, they serialize absolutely everything. So my main serial here is E, and it looks like 18328. So the E serial numbers were produced between 1942 and 1944, and they were at the Orange plant. So the Orange Small Arms Factory. Your main designation is here. If we turn to shed a little light on it. So you've got MA Lithgow, SMLE, so short magazine Lee Enfield, and you'll see the 3 in Roman numerals and the star, and date of production, what do you know, 1942. So the serial number matches the date of production. I'd hope so. You will find a lot of these where all the parts just got thrown in crates, and then they got slapped back together and the dealing was it worked. Now, as you can see, without boring you and going into the 500,000 marks that are on this rifle, you can tell a whole lot about the history of this rifle, what it went through, based on a lot of these markings. Earlier, the Mark III's pre-war production would actually even have a stock disc on the back, a little brass ring down on the buttstock, and that would donate all sorts of things like the unit that firearm was assigned to, etc. A lot of the rifles that would have seen service with Australia would also be stamped with the unit or where they went, or more specifically probably the branch. To give you an idea, they were referred to as issue marks. So say if you had AN, that would be an Australian Navy variant. You'd have, 1MD, First Military District, which was Northern Queensland. So you have all these different marks that you may see on one of these firearms. If you do get your hands on one, I encourage you to get the information on the marks and go through it, find out the history of the rifle, because some of these things are really unique and hold a lot of value as a collector's rifle as well. If this had a bright, shiny barrel on it, I couldn't even imagine what it would be worth with all the matching serial numbers, including the bayonet. But it's not a safe queen. It's a rifle I love to shoot. Really, really reminds me to pay attention to trigger discipline, rifle handling, and it tests me as a shooter. We can all shoot that, 26-pound competition rifle with that 1-pound trigger on it, but picking up something like this and trying to shoot this accurately is a whole nother sport. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help you out. Hit me up in the comments down below. As always, please like and subscribe and share this with a buddy. And until next time, happy shooting.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And if you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Catch you next time.